Your journey has been an interesting one up to here. You've questioned so much more than those around you. You've even questioned yourself as to how you could have grown into these thoughts. Am I crazy? When did I begin to think differently? Why do people in general appear so limited in their thought process? Rest assured, you are not alone. The world is slowly waking up to what you already know inside, yet can't quite verbalize. Welcome to the Spiritual Dope Podcast, the show that answers the questions you never even knew to ask, but needed the answers to. Questions about you, this world, the people in it. Most importantly, how do I proceed now moving forward? We don't claim to have all the answers, but we sure do love living in the question. Time for another hit of Spiritual Dope with your host, Brandon Henley. Let's get right into today's episode.
Hey there, Spiritual Dope. I am on here today with CarlosTanner. He is one of the founders, if not the founder, of the Ayahuasca Foundation, which founded in the spring of 2008. He's an American and a student of, you got the
Curanderismo.
One more time.
Curanderismo.
We'll dig into that.
Yeah.
After living and studying with Coriando for over 4 years, Carlos worked to provide a safe and effective way for people to not only receive treatment in the healing tradition of the Amazon, but also to study the tradition, the way he had with his maestro. The idea for the Ayahuasca Foundation was born from a desire to spread the science of plant medicine back into the world. Carlos, so glad that we got connected. Thanks for being on here today.
Yeah, man. It's awesome to meet you. Hope you're doing well.
Sure. Absolutely. I am. Thank you. Just had my birthday yesterday. How about that?
Oh, man. Happy birthday.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. We'll keep doing it as long as they let us keep doing it. Right, Carlos?
That's right.
So I like to start these off with the idea that you and I are, and it's funny because I listened to one of your audios, older one, and I think this will resonate with you. But you and I were vessels for universal energy. Call it what you will. Call it life. Call it God. Call it whatever. And kind of our purpose here is to help other people out. And while you and I are going to be having a conversation, you and I will enjoy, there's going to be somebody that tunes in that can only hear the message that you're going to deliver, that life energy, universal energy is going to be delivering through you today. What's that message to that person tune in today, Carlos?
In general, that message is that we are not alone. We are individuals in the same sense that all of the trillions of cells in my body are individuals, but we are also part of a much greater whole, a conscious being, a wise and powerful being. Call it the earth, call it the galaxy, call it God, the universe, whatever. I think it's easiest to call it the earth because we've actually seen a picture of that thing, and we're here and we feel it. And knowing that we're a part of that, we can also know that we're taken care of. Our cells don't worry about their survival or about their competition with other cells.
Right.
They know that they're taken care of and they fulfill the role that they're made for. And the better they can fulfill that, the better they are. So their job is just to stay healthy and do their best to stay healthy so that they can contribute to the health of the whole, which is me or you or each one of us in terms of cellular activity. But we are also those cells in the body of the earth. And our instincts are what connect us energetically and consciously to that greater whole. So if we can revive those instincts, then we can revive that connection and receive that guidance and that wisdom that allows us to know which direction to go in our lives.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Right. It's a benevolent universe, right? It's kind of already looking out for us in the same way that we're not even looking out for ourselves. They're doing it. We're doing it. And when you talk about, being a part of Earth or the planet, it reminds me of Alan Watts, who says, the Earth peoples, right? If a fruit tree generates whatever fruit that it does, Earth creates people, right? It's out there peopling. One of the things that we touched base on was the idea of how you got to where you are today doing this foundation. And part of that is in line with what I'm working on this year, from sinners into saints, Carlos, right? A lot of times I think people, they come to somebody like yourself, like, wow, you're so at peace. You're doing so many good things, but you weren't always a saint, Carlos, right? And you might even like quibble with are you a saint now? But let's go back to I think
20 years ago.
20 years ago. Yeah, let's go back to what was going on in your life before you found ayahuasca.
Yeah, I mean, if you went back 20 years ago today, I don't know exactly the day, but right around this month, this exact period 20 years ago, I was making the decision that I didn't care about my life anymore.
Mm.
I quit my job and decided to be a drug runner. So I was going to drive drugs across the country and for a drug dealer. And that's because I just didn't care anymore. And I was a drug addict myself. And I had hit that point where if you happen to be a drug addict that gets to that point, there's a point where you just say, you know what, I don't care anymore.
Sure.
And so I'll do whatever. Like it just doesn't make a difference to me. I don't have a future, I don't,
yeah.
And so I had gotten to that point right now, exactly 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, that point was significant because up to that point, I was a drug addict, but I was functional. I was maintaining a semblance of life that was legitimate. I went to a job 5 days a week. I had a good job, actually. People didn't know the depths of my addiction. But that, those tiny little increments get you to that threshold, which go the other way too. And hopefully we can talk about that as well. It's one little degree less and less. And then you eventually hit that freezing point or that melting point or whatever you call it,
Sure.
But that happened for me almost exactly 20 years ago. And then fast forward 4 months from that period, and I had blacked out behind the wheel of my car, driven off the road into a river and almost died. That was like my rock bottom, and how quickly my life had spiraled downward to that point. But that point served to be one of the most important moments of my life, because it was at that moment that I said, I do care. And I don't want to die. Like I want to live. And I knew that I had almost killed myself that night. And I made kind of a declaration to the universe, to the earth, to God, that I would do something drastic to save my life. And then about a week later, I got an email from a friend of mine who was in Peru. I didn't know she was in Peru, and she had met these two guys, and they were going to go drink ayahuasca together. She thought of me and asked me if I wanted to fly down to Peru and go to some ayahuasca ceremonies with her. And I knew that that was a sign, that was the response, right? I had said, okay, I'm going to do something to save my life. And then a message arrives out randomly saying, hey, why don't you come down to Peru and drink ayahuasca with me? So when I got on the plane in May of 2003, I knew, like, this is me going to save my life. So that was an important detail, I feel, because I wasn't just going to like give it a shot, I already believed that this was a message from the universe in response to my declaration to save my life. And that's my mind. That was my mindset.
You'd already had you'd already said, hey, take me, universe, I'm yours, kind of thing, right? Or I guess if we look at some of the other, like AA or something, like you'd surrendered to a higher power, if you would, right? Like without having maybe gone to AA and said, hey, I surrender to a higher power. But you said, there's a higher power out there. I am either connected to it or looking to connect with it. And if we look at breadcrumbs, right? This was your breadcrumb. This was like, all right, I'm going to follow this. I don't know exactly what's going on, but I'm going after it. What was your familiarity with ayahuasca up to that point?
I had read a lot about it. I was fascinated by it. I had kind of stumbled across it because I was very interested in shamanism. So I guess I came to shamanism by reading Carlos Castaneda, like so many people probably did. And then I read The Way of the Shaman by Michael Harner. And that first chapter of that book, which unfortunately he's since taken out, but I had an earlier version that had the original publication, and it was a chapter about how he got into shamanism, which was through drinking ayahuasca. So that was the first time I heard the word, and that quickly like sent me into research mode, where I started like trying to find as much information as I could. Found the Yahe letters by Allen Ginsberg. By William S. Burroughs and Terrence McKenna, and then read everything I could. Was very, very curious about it. That did lead to me drinking ayahuasca once in Massachusetts, where I was living at the time, but it wasn't. I knew it wasn't real, like a real experience or authentic by any means, but it was ayahuasca, and that was the closest, that I had gotten up until that point.
Sure. And for people that aren't familiar with you, you had an opioid addiction, but before that, you had a familiarity with like LSD, other psychedelics, MDMA, and whatnot. And so the idea, I guess, of ayahuasca and being what it was, as well as being connected to like kind of shamanism, was enticing beyond street level psychedelics for you. Is that kind of what I understand?
Yeah. I appreciate you kind of like bringing it back and putting those pieces together. So I had an affinity for psychedelics for a while. In high school, I was introduced to psychedelics and by my older brother. So that was also kind of an important person to introduce me, because I had complete trust and love for that person. I took to psychedelics very quickly, mushrooms, LSD, but when I would take them, I was often alone or, with a select group of people. But even if I was in a social setting, I would often find myself by myself out in the woods, because it just meant something different to me. Mm-hmm. When I took psychedelics, it was shamanic, even if I didn't know that it was, Sure. When I first started, it just was. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't like take them recreationally. I took them like in a expansive way, where I felt like I was expanding my awareness and enhancing my consciousness, and that's why I would call it shamanic.
Sure. No, and that makes sense. I mean, and having yourself being pulled into the woods and into nature, right? That's not an experience that I think I've ever if I had to go jog my memory for my experiences, I'm like, I don't remember any of it, like being like, oh, I got to go hang out in nature. I love looking at nature, because it's really hard to replicate that experience, right? You get to watch like the earth breathing, right? Like when you're on a psychedelic and you're like you're breathing, the earth's breathing, everything's breathing at the same time. It's a mind-blowing experience, right? So I can see the draw and the allure. I personally was never like, I gotta go, guys. Hey, you can find me over in the woods. I'll be by my favorite tree, right? You know where to find me. You know the one. So I get it though. So that's pretty cool to hear that yours, you felt a call and in a different way, even with these kind of again, street level psychedelics. I'll just call them, just because that's the I guess nomenclature we can run with here. Okay, so you got your friend down there, and I love that. The other part too, and I picked this up in your other podcast that I listened to, was like, it wasn't just like two other people that she was gonna do. It was like these two Russian guys down there, and give me a little bit of background on these guys too. How are they connected, and where they come from, and how they tie into the story?
Sure. I hope they don't mind me talking about them. Roman and Eugene. They were. I mean, I met them when I got to Iquitos, so I didn't know them. And they had run into my friend Lydia as she was trying to find a spot to smoke a joint in Iquitos, and happened to like wander down this boulevard close to where they lived, and they bumped into each other. and then smoked a joint together and started talking, and topic of ayahuasca had come up. I'd been talking about ayahuasca because I was reading about it. So she remembered that I had introduced her to ayahuasca and thought of me when she heard ayahuasca. But yeah, I ended up living with those guys while I was there. Lydia and I both stayed with them in their house that they were renting in Iquitos. And they were, I mean, I connected really, really well with Eugene. He was super laid back. Roman, I felt, was kind of trying to be a guru. He kind of had that vibe where he wanted to like be a leader of something, you know. So
Sure.
he and I honestly didn't really get along that well. There were times when we were fine with each other, but a lot of the times I was just like, "Hey, man, I'm not looking for a guru," you know.
Sure.
But they were instrumental for me because they had already built a relationship with Don Juan, who was the curandero, which just means healer. Curar is to cure in Spanish, and the shaman, if you want to call him that. And so that was instrumental because they brought me to Don Juan. Although by the third ceremony, Don Juan and I created a really strong bond, and he invited me to live with him and be his student in that third ceremony. So at that point, my relationship with Roman and Eugene had kind of come to its fulfillment, even though I did, I did still stay with them, and they were in those last two ceremonies because I did 5 ceremonies on that first trip. But once I had built that bond with Don Juan, then everything kind of took a different turn. I became his student essentially right at that moment that I accepted that offer to live with him and be his student.
Carlos, I think it's pretty interesting that are you born and raised in Massachusetts? Is that the
Not quite. I was born in Maryland, lived in New Hampshire and Connecticut, ended up in Massachusetts.
So stateside. Okay, that's what I'm trying to figure out. So what I think is pretty interesting about the story is like you go down into like a native territory, and he picked you right up, right? Like, and it would almost, for me, like I would think, wow, I wouldn't think that they would pull me in that quickly. What was it, do you think, that made him pull an outsider in to be his student so quickly?
Well, that's a great question. I can't see into his experiences, so
Did you guys ever have that conversation?
No, I didn't, to be honest. I don't know how much it would have mattered. I felt like it was my decision to make. Okay. And I agreed with the offer. Like I felt like he told me it was my path to be a healer, and in my experiences in those ceremonies, it was undoubtedly true. Did he see into my visions? Was he able to see like what was happening in my ayahuasca experiences in my perception? I'm not sure. My honest guess would be maybe energetically, but I did have conversations with him after each ceremony where I talked about my experience, and I really think that was more telling for him. However, I'm completely open to the idea that he could actually see the spirits that I was seeing, and could at least get a gist of the interactions that I was having. But my first ceremony, in the middle of the ceremony, I told him that I had been outside and seen UFOs in the sky, to which he said, "Did you see the big one?" Right. And I'd seen 2 little ones and 1 big one. And I was like, "Yes, I did." So that was like the very, very first time I'd ever met him. A couple hours in, we're in an ayahuasca ceremony, and there was this kind of shared bond where I was like, "Man, I just saw UFOs in the sky." And he's like, "Did you see the big one?" I'm like, "Yeah, I did." He was like, "Oh, I didn't," so right off the bat, there was, through a communication, not like a special power, although I'm not closing down that idea, that I was having a type of experience that might be called unique. And then I spoke about other experiences in my ceremonies, And I also began to talk to other people, and like Roman and Eugene and Lydia, and realized, oh my gosh, you guys you're not having what I'm having, like you're not talking to spirits. Spirits aren't coming up to you. You're not like having these interactions with spirits.
Right.
And
you're like this shit's not hitting you guys.
well, they were having experiences, but I of course assumed that everyone was just having what I was having.
Sure. I mean, that's the nature of it, right? Especially again, just drawing on my own history and knowledge of like kind of psychedelics, right? We're all like in the same room, and they're thinking the same thing you're thinking and going through the same thing, but they're not. Right? They're in a totally different space and time zone and all this other stuff, right? So that's what you were experiencing with those guys?
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, the perfect example was the second ceremony. I had a hand on my shoulder, like I felt a hand come onto my shoulder, and I looked over, and there was the hand of a man standing next to me, and supporting me, like his hand on my shoulder, the way that you might just show your support for someone. And I was looking up at him, my eyes were open, I'm looking at this guy, I'm like, oh my God, like you are so real.
Yeah.
Like you're so real. I could tell it wasn't like a solid man or whatever you want to call it. Like it wasn't like me, but yet I could see him, I could feel him, like so real, so real.
Right.
And I was just baffled at that. I'm like, wow, this is so real. Like, and then Lydia called out to me and was like, Carlos, I'm looking over at you and it looks like there's a man standing next to you. And then I was like, yeah, I know. I'm looking at him, but it's okay.
That's intense. That's pretty
He's
crazy.
a good guy. Like, I was like, he's a good guy. And she's like, are you sure? Because it's freaking me out. I'm like, no, I can tell, know? So, and then instantly I'm like, whoa, this is real. Like she's seeing him. Right. I thought maybe this was like a vision in my mind, but no, he's here, like in the room. Right. So then I put my hand out, I shook hands with him. Like we had a kind of a comical conversation because I recognized who he was, which was a person from my youth who had committed suicide. And, I'm like, my mind is like smashed wide open by the experience. But that was another very, very telling, I guess, clue that I maybe had an affinity for this outside of the norm, and that perhaps like Don Juan had picked up on, and thus offered me this opportunity to work with him and live with him.
Well, look, I mean, just general curiosity, right? You're an outsider, you show up, you're there for a week, and it's kind of like, why don't you come study with me? Everybody else is like, you got the other guy who's looking to be the guru, and he's probably like, well, why didn't he pick me type of thing, right? Like, so that was kind of the genesis of that question there. So look, obviously you're pulled right in, you're sucked right in. I'm just, because I know we have limited time today, I'm gonna cut to the chase a little bit. You say, yeah, I'm in. You go home, you sell your stuff, you pack up, and you go down to it's Peru, right? Down to
Iquitos, Peru. Yeah.
Yep, Iquitos, Peru. And you spend 4 years with them, and then is this like when you decide, all right, listen, I feel like I've learned enough. Tell me how you came to say, let's start a foundation, let's start a retreat. What's that look like?
Yeah. Oh man. So I was his student, but I was American. I am American, although now I'm a dual citizen. And so I wasn't like a indigenous student. No offense to the indigenous people by any means. I have such tremendous respect for them. But indigenous people didn't have written language. And for a very long time, they didn't have access to the technologies that we do. And so I took notes and I filmed with a video camera, and I made recordings with an audio recorder. I took advantage of every educational tool and concept and technique that I could because of my Western upbringing in the educational system of the United States. So I, at one point, had collected all of these materials, these educational materials, and I had said to myself, like, wow, what if I had gotten these like given to me when I arrived? What if they're like, oh, you're going to be studying this? Here's your book, here's your audio recordings, here's all the videos you need to watch. And I would have like flown ahead. My progress would have skyrocketed compared to the struggle of slowly, bit by bit, like working through all of that and navigating it all. Sure. And that gave me the light bulb. Like, what if I did this? What if I made a course and taught this material to people like me that felt that same call, and I could accelerate how quickly they could learn and understand these materials because I had done this work already. And so that's really what gave birth to the idea of the Ayahuasca Foundation, was to have an educational course that could teach people that were on a similar path as me, based on the experiences and the materials that I'd put together in my educational experience. But yeah, I mean, why it culminated in 4 years was really more two parts. One part, I had met the woman that would become my wife. And so living with my teacher and his 19-member family in one house.
It's a big house, man. Big, a lot of people.
Right. But it was kind of like, well, what's the plan here? Am I going to like come and live with you? Are we going to get married and live in this house with this huge family? And
does it become Dances with Wolves, like, type of scenario? The movie,
well,
right?
not quite. But she was Peruvian, and she is Peruvian. But that was the reason why I moved out. Like, let me get my own place.
Sure.
So that's kind of when it ended at 4 years, even though I continued to have a relationship with him for up until his death, really.
Sure.
And then the other component was that Don Juan, wasn't really on board with that vision.
The retreat.
Yeah, like the idea of putting this course together. And so I taught it. I was like, well, I'll teach it, but the ceremonies will be with you. And so I was kind of like pulling teeth to get him to like.
What was his resistance on it?
Well, he didn't. He didn't like the Western educational model, and that was kind of the key of the course. Was like, no, we're gonna use elements of the Western educational model. Right. In order to accelerate the education, but he didn't like to write things down. He didn't like and he defended it very legitimately. He said, look, I don't like things getting written down because someone can then take my words and then I'm not there, and then they don't understand them, they misrepresent them, or they use them in a way that is wrong against what the true meaning I have for them is. And I can't be there to correct it or to defend it. And I was like, totally legitimate. But like, you
gotta have a basis point. Like you've got a basis point and a way to scale some of this stuff. And then like for the true seeker or the person who's really, this helps actually kind of weed people out too, right? You got people that'll study the materials, and it's kind of like the person that makes it through the gauntlet, you're like, all right, you're in.
Right. Well, I like I said, like every criticism of written thoughts is totally legitimate, the problems with them. But there's also tremendous pros to that argument, right?
Sure. Right.
Where would we be if we didn't have the whole history of literature behind us to build upon, So, I'm saying the pros definitely outweigh the cons. Yes, the cons are there, and I don't deny them, but the pros far outweigh them. So basically, when I moved out, that gave me some freedom where I was like, hey, you know what? Like, I don't live with this guy. I'm going to see what a different curandero is like. I'd never drank ayahuasca with anyone but him.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that kind of gave me a little bit of flexibility where I was like, hey, I'm going to see what this guy's about or what this woman's about. So I did like work with a couple other curanderos at that point, Don Lucho and Doña Otilia. And then I met Don Enrique Lopez, who's Shipibo. And when I met him, he was a teacher from the minute I met him. Like, he wanted to teach me everything he knew as soon as I met him. And I was just eating it up.
Sure.
And he didn't hold back. There was nothing that he wasn't going to tell me, which was a phenomenon, because even with Doña Otilia and Lucho, and especially with Don Juan, there were things where they were just like, you know, you're going to have to figure that out. You know, like there was a point where they didn't.
Were some of those areas that like that they were resistant and, like, I guess trying to translate their own experiences into words and share it with you?
Well, it wasn't the same for each person.
Sure.
And
No,
honestly, again, like, I don't even criticize that. I think
it's not a criticism, right? Like,
a legitimate.
it's just kind of like, yeah, where
it
those
took me
points?
20
Like,
years to learn this. You think I'm just gonna like hand it over? Like, I get it, you know. I'm
Right.
not. I totally get it. So with Doña Otilia, I totally have a memory of her like doing a plant treatment on a patient, using a plant in her hand that she was mashing up and soaking in water, and like using that plant to rub on this person's back. And I said, "What plant is that?" And she said, "It's a cousin of Uña de Gato." And I was like, "Well, what's it called?"
Right.
And then she just held out a leaf and she goes, "It's this." And I was like, okay, well, you know,
Right.
I guess you just don't want to tell me what plant that is. And I get that. There was this kind of vibe that if I knew all that stuff, maybe I wouldn't need them, or hey, it took me a long time to learn this stuff. I'm not just going to hand it to you for free, kind of thing, you know. And
Sure.
not that I mean, it wasn't for free, but you know what I'm saying. And
Yeah.
and I get that too. So I wasn't even, I mean, I was frustrated by that. Who wouldn't be if you're asking a question that doesn't get an answer? But when I met Don Enrique, none of that.
No holds barred.
Whatever you want to know, I'll tell you everything I know. And when I
Sure.
told him, like, hey, I've got this idea, it's for this course, he was like, that's why I'm here.
Right.
That's why I came to Iquitos. The Shipibo live like 3 days down upriver from Iquitos. He's like, because God told me that I should come to Iquitos and teach people from all over the world the Shipibo tradition. And I was just like, okay, like let's do this.
Sure.
So that was in 2009, and then that same year we started
real
the
quick,
Ayahuasca
like,
Foundation.
Like, what are you doing outside of like learning while you're there? Are you working? Did you make that much off of selling your stuff? Did it lasted you that long while you were down there?
No.
Like, yeah. So tell me, like, you know, what's happening outside of, like, you know, sipping ayahuasca?
Right. Well, I realized that my best endeavor would be to sell these Shipibo telas. So at that time, there was a small community of Shipibos. Like I said, they were from 3 days upriver, but they had come to Iquitos to sell arts and crafts as a way to make money. And so there were no real artisans markets then, but these women would walk around the plaza with a bag that had their telas in it. They're sewing with these beautiful, intricate ayahuasca-inspired designs. And they would just pull up one out and open it if you were walking by, like to try to get you to buy one. And I would buy them. And that's how I got to know Doña Vilma Mahua. She was, to me, my favorite of the artisans. And her level of quality to me was the highest. So I started to get an eye for like what the highest quality was, because I was buying them and I would ship them to my brother in Massachusetts, and then he would sell them on eBay, and then he'd send me the money back.
Cool.
And Doña Vilma Mahua got together with Don Enrique Lopez, and they became husband and wife. And so that's how I met Don Enrique, was because I had formed a relationship with Vilma, because I would purchase her telas and ship them back home as a way to support myself.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, definitely curious, right? Like, I mean, for the person listening in, it's like, all right, sure, I'm called, I'm gonna go down. What am I gonna do when I get
Right.
there? Like, yeah, what are some of the requirements? I guess I would ask that too for anybody else that kind of comes down there that you've met that decides they're gonna stick around. What are some of the things that, like, as they're on this journey, what's that journey look like?
Man, I mean, first of all, I feel beyond blessed. My life, the way that it worked out, that I was able to move in with a curandero and live with him and his family for 4 years is very, very unique. Very, very rare that it works out that way. And I feel so blessed that it did work out that way for me. Someone just wrote me yesterday asking pretty much the same question that you just asked. Like, hey, I know Carlos Tanner's story is that he was a heroin addict, then he went down and lived with a shaman for 4 years. How do you make that happen? Like, I don't know.
What are the steps for that, right?
Yeah, right. Like, I don't know how that happened. I mean, it just really felt like some divine path opening for me, as if it was my destiny. But it's not common. I mean, I don't know anyone else. I don't know a single other person that has that story. But what does it look like, to get to your question? Sorry. What does it look like if someone were to go down now, right?
Yeah. Like, let's say, if some other Westerner shows up, they're like, hey, Carlos, I'm in town. We just hooked up. What would you direct me to do? Like, I show up, Carlos. I'm like, hey, man, thanks for having me. I'm going to stay. How do I make this work?
Yeah, I might honestly say I don't think that's a good idea. But I do know people who have stayed and, have made it work. I would say that Iquitos, like, chews up and spits out the majority of those people. Because it's just so hard to put a legitimate, like, solid economic plan in place in Iquitos. It's not an easy thing to do. And again, that's why I feel so blessed and that I was able to have the opportunities that I did have. But, there's a guy named Jeremiah, shout out to Jeremiah, the mushroom ban. He kind of, like, got eaten and spit out, but he still managed to put something together where he grows his own mushrooms, not psilocybin cubensis mushrooms, like gourmet mushrooms, and sells them to restaurants. Another guy managed to put together an acai farm and grows and harvests acai to sell to restaurants. And so there's people that are, I know another guy that started a vanilla farm. So there's people that came down for ayahuasca, but in order to survive had to go outside of ayahuasca. And there's a few people obviously that came down and started centers, and they're my friends too.
What's that community look like down there, Carlos? I mean, so for the sorry for those listening, Carlos and I just kind of jumping into the conversation here, but you've got the retreat center, you've got a retreat down there, right? Sounds like there's a community of them. What's that community look like right now, and especially as it becomes popular? Look, Aaron Rodgers, right? I mean, that's. Right. Once it reaches, like, the football quarterback of an NFL team, I think that's peaking, right? Yeah. So even in, I think, the past 5 years, what have you seen? What's it done to and for ayahuasca?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of questions wrapped up in all that. So when it comes to the community, I know the people that run and own centers, but we don't actually see each other that often because it's a life that's in the jungle, so we're not, like, hanging around the town very much, although there's only a few restaurants, so we do bump into each other when we are in town at the same time. And we're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to make a better place for the world and trying to help people. But the second part of that question, what's happened in the last 5 years? I've seen a lot more emphasis on the education, which is great, to be honest. I was always surprised at why people weren't copying me, because I felt like I had a great idea. offering these courses. We just had our 50th initiation course, which is an 8-week program. So we've had over 700 students do that course now.
Wow.
But the key to that educational course, which is also the key to studying plant medicine or the science of curanderismo, which was the word that you struggled with. Curandero, again, is the healer. So curanderismo is the science of healing or being a healer, is plant dietas. And plant dietas is kind of like the scuba level of ocean exploration or plant medicine exploration as opposed to the snorkeling. And so the ayahuasca ceremony, as incredible as it is still kind of on a superficial level, or that surface level, looking down into this vast ocean of wisdom that is plant medicine. But the scuba level, where you actually bring yourself down into the depths, would be the plant dieta. I hope that's an okay metaphor to use, but I think
it makes sense, right? But I mean, it sounds like ayahuasca is kind of like the initiation stage, right? It's like, all right, listen, here's your introductory. If you're interested in more of what plant medicine can do, it's going to take a little bit longer.
Yeah, right.
And it's going to take some more time. Even 8 weeks, I think, it sounds like that's just, again, getting started. I had somebody else on. He spent I think 2 years just being with one plant, right? And getting to know what that plant is, and just so this it's very deep as far as I understand, and getting into the plant medicine. One thing I would ask Carlos is that how I heard you talking a little bit about kind of how these psychedelics connect you in one way, to source, kind of a amplification effect of the senses, right? Which again, just based off my experience with other psychedelics, yeah, I agree. How would you differentiate ayahuasca, or again, it sounds like there's multiple flavors, right? It sounds like, it's kind of like you got vodka, you got gin, you got bourbon. There's different types of ayahuasca, if I kind of heard it correctly. How would you say that they differ from like mushrooms, LSD, or something like that? What's that experience?
Well, to be fair, like mushrooms and LSD are also very distinct substances as well. So ayahuasca, I would say, is probably closer to mushrooms than mushrooms is to LSD, or than ayahuasca is to LSD. They're both plant-based, obviously, and they're both tryptamines, if you were to look at them from a chemical perspective. The roots, I think, would be the key there. So ayahuasca has a very, very rich context of use, a very, very rich tradition that probably was that rich for mushrooms at a time, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, with colonialism and westernization of North America, we don't really have that depth of context anymore, that rich culture or tradition. But ayahuasca does. And that, to me, is what sets it apart from all of the other substances, with the exception of iboga or peyote, because they do still have, for the most part, intact traditions of use. Right. But that makes a really big difference. I'm actually going to be giving a talk at Columbia University next week on that specifically, like how the ceremonial use of ayahuasca is such a potent combination by having it be done in that ceremony. And I want actually to, like, one of the big messages I have is that if we brought ceremony into modern medicine, we would receive much better results. And by that, I mean, if you had a chemotherapy ceremony, if you had surgery ceremonies, if you had a sacredness to medical treatment, even if it was pharmacological treatment, or even if it was modern medical treatment, if you introduce the sacred, which means the reverence and the highest level of respect and focused consciousness and attention, then you would achieve better results. But a lot of the time, here's a great example, like to contrast chemotherapy with ayahuasca. because I think they're similar in the sense of the duration of how long it lasts. It is an event. It produces some symptoms, nausea being a common one, but yet the perception is so very, very different. When you go to an ayahuasca ceremony, before you go, there's a mental preparation, there's a physical preparation. It's on the forefront of your mind, but with such reverence and with such honor and gratitude. When you actually get the cup, you're speaking to ayahuasca as a wise being, respectfully admiring the power and wisdom and beauty that ayahuasca contains. You're grateful for the opportunity to be able to commune with ayahuasca in that ceremony. Contrast that to chemotherapy. It's the exact opposite in the sense that people dread it, they hate it. It's like a nightmare to even walk into the clinic to get the chemo is like the worst thing they could possibly imagine doing. They hate the medicine that they want to heal them. And
I'll tell you, Carlos,
if you could transform that just to love the medicine that you want to heal you, you're going to have better results.
For sure. I know that people, and I've never had an ayahuasca experience, but I know my understanding is there's purging on both sides, and I'm like, I'm out, right? But it becomes like this transformation experience, right? Where again, you love what you're going through, and it's just kind of all part of the process. And I get it, right? Like kind of what's you're being purified and you're being cleansed, and nothing where I just like to tease, right? Again, if I'm purging on both sides, that might not be for me, but if you accept it and you go into it in the sacredness that it is, then I agree, right? And there's been, I'm sure you found your own studies, but like even if the person giving the care has been shown to love what it is that they do, the person receiving the care has been shown to receive more benefit than the person who just goes in, hey, this is my day job, and make sure you get stabbed here, take this medicine and roll out next. Of course. Right? So it makes all the sense in the world. Set and setting, right? Let's go in there, let's create this space, let's honor this space, let's come in here and let's came here for what we came here for, right? And what is that intention? And so that all makes sense. And I think you totally we're gonna fly through here towards the end. There was one story that you had told, and I thought that was really cool. You had somebody come down with testicular cancer, right? It was a story I'd heard. It was prostate, close enough. They're not too far apart. But he came down with cancer, right? Why don't you, for a person that hasn't heard, why don't you just share that story a little bit?
Sure. That's in the film Ayahuasca Diary. So you can actually look that up on YouTube and watch that whole film. Luis, shout out to Luis. He came down with prostate cancer. He answered an ad in the LA Times by the film crew that was shooting this documentary. I had no idea they were doing this, putting this ad in the LA Times. And it just said, plant medicine heals anything. Contact us for a free trip to Peru to receive treatment. And I was like, oh my God, that was how you got these people? But it did attract this guy, Luis, who contacted them, and they did fly him down to work with us and made this documentary film. And when he showed up, it's on film too. Like his first conversation with Don Juan was, he said, the medicine that they want to give me in the US, I don't believe in. I don't think it's helping me. I know that the plants will heal me.
Yeah.
And so he was Peruvian. His ancestry was Peruvian. He was American and lived in Los Angeles, but his ancestors had a rich faith in plant medicine that still carried over with him. And that was huge. Sure. That was really, really important because he knew the plants would heal him. Right. And you touched on something where the caregiver, right? Like it matters how much they love the medicine that they're doing or the work that they're doing. Huge, huge. So when the curandero is holding a ceremony and they're singing their songs, they are sharing, they are transmitting their faith out into the ceremony space. And each participant is receiving that faith And it is transforming their own belief system to become more and more solid in the knowing that there will be healing, that the healing will be done. And this guy, Luis, showed up with that already, like maybe not all the way, but he was with that. And also through the treatments, because some of the treatments, ayahuasca makes some treatments look like a walk in the park when it comes to throwing up or having diarrhea. There are certain category of plants called purgatives. And he was a champ the whole way through. He was like, whatever it takes, whatever it takes. And if you get to a point, no matter what you're trying to do, where you're actually truly stating whatever it takes, you're going to succeed.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's important to, when I think it's cool on one hand that in the Western, U.S., we're like, yeah, plant medicine, let's do it. We're in, right? But I also don't want it to be code for like, again, let's just go get high, right? Because too, when you're talking plant medicine, you're not just talking about ayahuasca, you're not just talking about mushrooms or marijuana. You're talking about like, look, I mean, I know you're not in Peru right now, but like all the stuff that's around them, they figured out how to leverage and use medicinally, right? So they've got these I don't know any, so I'm just kind of just speaking out loud, right? Like they've got these purgatives, they've got this medicine. So when he goes down there for a treatment in this retreat, it's not just I'm hanging out with ayahuasca. Again, there's a full medicinal treatment. Am I understanding correct? Okay.
Yeah, totally. No, there are plants that the first plant that you need to take in a treatment is always a digestive system cleanse. There's a number of them that might be used. We use a different a set of them, but you want to cleanse your digestive system first, of course, because it's through your digestive system that you're going to take other plant medicines, but you're also going to need to take nourishment. You're going to want to have your nourishment, your energy, which is oftentimes a cause of your illness is a malnourishment, which is associated with your digestion. How many people do you know that have some type of digestive issue? It's like everyone.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Right. So you need to make sure that you're having good digestion, which means that you're also eating good food. The food that you eat during a treatment is very well thought out, and it's very low stimulant. And so that's a huge part of it. Now, the purification that you mentioned, that's a massive part of it, because what's another cause of illness? Well, we've got malnutrition or some deficiency, and then toxicity. So who do you know that lives in an environment that doesn't have toxins in it? Like we don't know anybody. So, ultimately coming to a retreat at the Ayahuasca Foundation, go to the purest place you can find. Our center is literally located in the center of a national reserve surrounded by 130,000 acres of pristine forest.
Crazy. It's gorgeous, man. The pictures are gorgeous.
Yeah, thank you. It's pure environment. So, and then let's use these substances, these plant medicines, to get rid of the toxins, to purify your digestive system, then purify your circulatory system, and purify your blood, purify your central nervous system, purify your respiratory system. There are all these different plants that target those systems, as well as the ayahuasca is targeting your emotional system, your spiritual system, your mental system.
Yeah. Now, Carlos, it's been awesome, man. Maybe I should have tacked on the first half hour. And we could have gone deeper. Definitely a lot to know. Definitely still so much out there to learn. One question I would have for you before we get out of here is, I'd seen some articles on, I guess, some of the ingredients of the ayahuasca. Like, I guess it's a vine, right? Like, I'm not totally deep in on it, right? Like, and they're older, and there's a piece to that. There's a sacredness to the vine in and of itself, and the caretaking and all that. And being given that it's becoming so popular and glamorized, is there a concern there?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say there should be a concern, but I wouldn't say it's a worry. Thankfully, ayahuasca is now one of the most valuable things you could put on the market. Like if you're trying to decide, hey, what should I grow? and there's something that sells for $400 a pound, that's
Sure.
what you're going to grow, right?
Right.
So because of that, just kind of the free market has created plantations of ayahuasca vines because it will make the most money. So for that reason, we don't have to worry. But to say that we shouldn't be concerned, I mean, I don't know. We should be concerned. Let's make sure that we are sustainably harvesting, that we are doing things with respect and honoring.
Yeah, even that, Carlos. And again, we've only got a couple minutes left. Does that do anything to the sacredness of it, though? Again, right? Like if I find it and it's in the wild, right? That's one thing, right? Especially remember you being drawn. You weren't drawn to a farm. You were drawn to the wild.
Yeah, you're never going to find it in the wild, though. That's one of the most remarkable things about ayahuasca is that it only grows in secondary forests. So it only grows in forests where trees have been cut down. Huh. So it seems to have like it's almost like birthed by human consciousness or something. It's very unusual. But mushrooms too, like psilocybin mushrooms grow in cow poop, right? So
sure,
they like needed humans to have
propagation.
Yeah, right.
Well, awesome, Carlos, man. It's been a blast. Where, who should be reaching out to you? Where should they reach out to you? And what's next for you?
Well, anybody can reach out to me. Our website, ayahuascafoundation.org, has a contact us form, and that goes straight to me. I try my best to respond to anyone that writes me, even if the question is silly. Not that I'm encouraging people to write me with silly questions.
Well, now I want to know, what's a silly question? What are some silly questions?
Someone called me actually today and asked me how much does the retreat cost, and I was like, well, are you looking at the website? Like, so if you do want to ask me a question, check the website. I do think there's a lot of information on there first. But yeah, I'm on all the social media platforms, Ayahuasca Foundation or Carlos Tanner. And we have a YouTube channel, and I put up a 10-episode series called Lessons from Ayahuasca, which I think could be helpful for some people if they're trying to understand, what ayahuasca treatment looks like.
Well, Carlos, man, this has been super informative from opioid addict crawling out of the car in a river to bringing ayahuasca to the world and plant medicine and offering this retreat. I think that's awesome. So I appreciate what it is that you're doing out there.
Thanks so much. And thanks again for having me on this show.
Absolutely. Well, cool. I mean, that's where I'll cut it. We did it in an hour, so appreciate it, man. Good luck on the next one. I'll let you know when it releases. We're probably looking at about like 2 months out. I'll share it out, and if there's anything else I can do to help support you, just let me know.
Yeah, no worries, man. If you can put a link to the website, liner notes for that would be awesome.
100%. We'll do, Carlos. All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Well, man, yeah, thanks. It was great to meet you. Have a good night.
Likewise. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Spiritual Dope Podcast. Stay connected with us directly through spiritualdope.co. You can also join the discussion on Facebook, Spiritual Dope, and Instagram at spiritual_dope. If you would like to speak with us, send us an email through brandon@spiritualdope.co. And as always, thank you for cultivating your mindset and creating a better reality. This concludes the most thought-provoking part of your day. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay fully up to date. Until next time, be kind to yourself and trust your intuition.